Real estate is a fickle business that can make or break your bank account. So imagine how stressful it would be if your country's bank balance, even your nation's existence, depended on a good land deal. Now you have the stakes the US government had to meet with the Louisiana Purchase. That was the name for the exchange between America and the French First Republic for 828,000 square miles of Middle America way back in 1803. Without it, the US would not be what it is today. So how exactly was the deal struck? How do you pay for half a continent in the time before digital bank accounts and credit cards? What led France to sell such a landmass, and how did America know they could trust the European country to hold up its end of the deal? If you thought finding an apartment to rent was hard enough, then get ready to learn how history works as we find out how the Louisiana Purchase actually worked. So let's start with the most obvious question. How did France even manage to get a hold of the middle slice of the Northern American continent? The likes of Iowa and Wyoming may be teased as flyover states nowadays, but during the spread of the colonial empires, the New World became a game changer in the arms race for global domination. The groundwork for the Louisiana Purchase goes back as far as the 7 Years' War, the closest thing to a world war, until, well, the World War. European powers and smaller European states fought bitterly to establish their preeminence. Britain and France were the most powerful of the opposing belligerents, with the Great British Empire eventually emerging victorious. But until then, one recurring theme was the dispute over the possession of North America between Britain and France. This was fresh territory in the eyes of the Europeans, who knew their rivals would use it to secure their global dominance. It is somewhat ironic then that Great Britain and France are at their closest point only 20 miles apart, yet would rage a bitter fight on the other side of the globe. And so French forts were built along key rivers and borders in those flyover states. The same borders and rivers that would be beneficial trade routes and sources of irrigation, an absolute must for any colony establishing itself in a new territory. But there was also fear from British settlers that their French enemies would use Native American tribes to advance an attack. People were getting paranoid, things were heating up. Negotiations to de-escalate the situation were held, but failed, and so a British attack against a fort was led by none other than George Washington himself. This first blood was initially successful, but France's counterattack forced the eventual first president to surrender. One thing was clear now. This land was of interest to both sides, yet neither was willing to give it up easily. And with matching firepower, it seemed like the meeting of an unstoppable force with an immovable object was going to last for some time. Eventually, news of this stalemate reached Europe, where both empires failed once again to negotiate a solution. So clear was it that the other coveted this land, in part due to the passage to the sea and fertile farmland, that each regularly dispatched troops to enforce their claims, slowly ratcheting up the tension. Soon, this back and forth brought in other nations who were sworn to help their ally defend their land. Prussia promised to help Britain defend Hanover, whereas France recruited longtime enemy Austria to back up for when Britain harassed any more fishing boats. Then, on the cusp of the end of the 7 Years' War, just as it looked like France was going to lose its empire once and for all, a series of clandestine, backdoor treaties were being made to stop the US's takeover of Louisiana. In one such treaty, France's King Louis XV ceded their territory to Spain so that French settlers who did not want to live under British colonial rule could immigrate freely to France-controlled states. The secret deal was known as the Treaty of Fontainebleau and gave 18 months for French settlers to seek Spanish protection for when Britain would make a move against the weakened French Empire. However, when news broke out, all was not well, because although the French had promised Britain to the eastern part of Louisiana when the 7 Years' War ended between them, they hadn't revealed that the western part would technically be under Spanish control. Those sneaky snail eaters. British citizens in the western area rejected the transition of power and expelled the Spanish governor. But it would be in vain because Spain would eventually quash the rebellion and fly their flag. It seemed the British Empire had gotten rid of one roadblock only to have another stand in its way. What they didn't realize was that the American War for Independence was going to shake things up even more, especially when France would support the traitors in their mission for a United States of America. So let's fast forward to the British infighting a bit to the signing of the Treaty of Paris on the 3rd of September, 1783. America has been recognized as a state. The war between it and the British Empire has ended, and now is the newly independent nation of America that controls the area east of the Mississippi and north of New Orleans. American settlers have been expanding bit by bit, and Spain had been weakened, making the risk that another power might swoop in to take important shipping routes of New Orleans ever more present. So America wanted to reconsider the policy that would allow Americans use of New Orleans, but instead, Spain revoked their privilege initially. This would be U-turned soon after, but it did show that once again this land was coveted. Whether it was Spain or France on one side, or Britain or the US on the other, made no difference. History was going to repeat until there was a decisive owner. Time passed, and this diplomatic tug-of-war for pieces of land between America and Spain seemed to be making progress. Spain couldn't support the maintenance of the land, and the US didn't want to go to war, but wasn't against it either. And so, a deal was struck for America to take this financial burden off of Spain. That was until 3 weeks before Spain was due to formally cede the territories to the US. Instead of passing ownership to Americans, they ceded it back to France, following another secret pact between Spain and France. The solidarity built up between France and the US against their common enemy, the British, would be for nothing. Because this time, the Founding Fathers were not up against a king who had helped them finance their independence, but a new ruler. A new kind of leader with a radical outlook on empires and foreign policy, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was a highly reputable military leader who was feared as much as he was admired. He had a big personality, a taste for expansion, and called all the shots when it came to his country's diplomatic wing. The last thing America needed was Napoleon closing the Mississippi to American trade. In fact, an invasion from this new French Republic was entirely possible, and would have been an ironic twist for a newborn state to be eradicated by the very people who helped build them. Their fears would be realized in 1801 when Napoleon sent military to secure New Orleans. History was repeating itself, but Napoleon was much beefier than the Spanish. Southern settlers feared that France would take their slaves or encourage an uprising and urged newly elected President Thomas Jefferson to bring the fight to those frog-eating Frenchies. Strike now while the iron is hot. But Jefferson, sensing this was a ploy by Federalists to undercut him, threatened an alliance with the United Kingdom, which would be like getting back with your terrible ex just to spite your old friend's bullying offspring. Politics sure is messy. While this was happening, France was fortifying its presence in the Caribbean following slave rebellions in its colonial states, especially in what would eventually be known as Haiti. This drop in funds from sugarcane plantations threatened Napoleon's plans to rebuild France's lost empire, and as tensions flared with the UK, he needed to be sure he had the financing to take back any military action. He had a lot on his plate, so this seems like a good chance for America to buy New Orleans. France could use the money by selling land that didn't fit Napoleon's world vision, and America could own those much-needed rivers and farmland once and for all. So a plan was set. Jefferson would send his diplomat Livingston to Paris in 1801 with an ultimatum: sell us Louisiana or we'll team up with the United Kingdom against you. To aid in this process, Jefferson used his connection with the French nobleman Pierre Samuel de Fontainebleau to facilitate backdoor diplomacy. Through him, the idea of selling Louisiana was presented as a way to diffuse tension between France and the US, countries who might be better off as allies than rivals. To add to this, Spain was slow to return the land to Napoleon, and even refused to cede Florida. Napoleon knew that he would need Louisiana fortified to fend off an invasion from the US or Britain, yet peace with the English monarchy seemed unlikely. But despite it looking more and more like Louisiana was going to be a thorn in his side, Napoleon focused his attention on Britain by preparing to invade the small island in 1803. That plan would be resisted by many of his advisors due to depletion of funds from overexpansion and rebellions in the Caribbean, so Napoleon had to take Jefferson's ultimatum seriously: sell the land that was giving him a headache or go up against Britain with an underfunded army. Thankfully, the emperor saw the reason, and much to Jefferson's surprise and glee, Napoleon agreed to sell. In one fell swoop, years on years of political tensions between changing hands had seemingly ended through one diplomatic mission, but the US had to move quickly in case Napoleon got cold feet. And so, on April 30th, 1803, the Louisiana Purchase Treaty was signed. By November of that year, France would withdraw 7,000 surviving troops and had abandoned its ambitions in the Western Hemisphere. A year after that, Haiti, one of the rebellion Caribbean colonies, declared independence. Further along the historical timeline, Napoleon would be defeated and his empire would crumble. But let's rewind a bit. When we say the treaty was signed, how was it paid for? Whose gold had to come out of what vault? Let's examine the procedure of actually buying a third of a continent's landmass from another country. The initial purchase price was around $15 million, meaning an acre was less than 3 cents. That's a bargain. However, the US was strapped for cash, and Napoleon wanted his money immediately to fund his invasion of Great Britain. If America hesitated on their end, Napoleon could tear up the treaty in a hissy fit. So, America was forced to borrow from 2 European banks at 6% interest, by which time the total cost had risen to $23 million. No small change, especially back then. So here's the fascinating way of how America paid for it. First of all, they canceled $3.75 million in debt that France owed them to bring the cost down. Next, 580,195 ounces of gold was given as a down payment. Using historical gold prices, it was a $3 million down payment. But how to get gold from the US vaults to Napoleon's? Shipping them across the Atlantic was too dangerous. Thankfully, John Adams had set up sovereign accounts and bank accounts in the Netherlands and Europe, so there was already groundwork in place. So, to handle the transaction, the US turned to the ancestors of Barings Bank and Denmark's Hope & Co., two of the biggest and most secure institutions at the time. So to sum it up, the US paid for it in a truly American way. They made a down payment and borrowed the rest from banks at an interest rate they struggled to afford. But what's done is done. Napoleon got his money. His invasion was thwarted, and America doubled in size, power, and relevancy with the signing of a pen. But I wonder, what exactly did the negotiations look like? Did the American diplomats drink tea and eat spiced food with Napoleon to seal the deal? Why were the early Americans so obsessed with tea and spice? Well, fortunately, I have the answer. Go and watch my video to find out. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how history works.